You made the move, and now, this morning, something in you wants to explain it, to send the message, to make one call, to say it out loud so it becomes real. That impulse has a name. Right now, Mercury is retrograde in Pisces and closing in on an exact collision with Mars at 10 degrees Pisces, precise at 1:07 a.m. Eastern Time on March 15th. March 14th is the day the full pressure of this alignment is already active, the orb fully open, the friction fully loaded. This is the third time Mercury and Mars have met in the current cycle, but the only time Mercury was moving backward when they collided. Here is what no one tells you about Mercury retrograde in Pisces. The danger is not miscommunication. It is the specific sensation that words will protect what you've built. They won't. In Pisces, language doesn't clarify intention. It dilutes it. In the next few minutes, you'll discover 3 things. First, why Mercury retrograde conjunct Mars in Pisces creates pressure to speak that feels identical to clarity and isn't. Second, what 1988 reveals about the real mechanics of this alignment and why the most consequential moves of that year were made in deliberate silence. Third, the exact window between today and the new moon on March 18th, and what happens to your intention if you let it speak too soon. The move is made. The only thing that can undo it now is your explanation of it. Something in your jaw is slightly tensed right now. There is pressure behind your sternum, not pain, not anxiety, but something that wants to move and hasn't. Your hands have already reached for your phone this morning before you decided to. That is not a decision. That is a reflex. Mercury crossed its inferior conjunction, its cazimi, with the Sun on March 7th at 16 degrees 52 minutes Pisces. That was the retrograde midpoint, the moment it passed directly between Earth and the Sun, invisible, reset. Since that point, it has been accelerating backward toward Mars, covering nearly 7 degrees in 8 days. Today, the gap between them is less than a single degree. The approach has been measurable, steady, and indifferent to what you chose to do with it. Mercury retrograde is an optical effect. Earth moves faster than Mercury at certain orbital intervals, and from the surface, Mercury appears to reverse. The planet does not physically move backward. But what we project outward, words, messages, calls, those are also projections. The question worth sitting with is this: what if the real danger of retrograde is not what goes backward, but what we push forward against the motion? The first 2 times Mercury met Mars in this cycle, November 2025 and January 2026, Mercury was moving in direct motion. Words could travel forward. They could build. This is the 3rd meeting, and Mercury is now moving the other direction. The mechanics have changed. The same configuration carries a different charge. In adults past 45, sustained stress or disrupted sleep shifts the balance between deliberate and reactive cognition, what Kahneman identified as System 2 and System 1. When System 2 slows, decisions that feel like clarity are often just tension that the brain has quietly restructured into logic. You've been awake earlier than needed, not from noise, from a thought already moving before your eyes opened. The hand that reached for the phone was not making a choice. It was releasing pressure. Right now, a woman in her early 60s is sitting in a kitchen in Chicago, turning her phone in her hands without pressing anything. A man outside London has typed a message and is reading it for the 4th time. Someone in Osaka is awake at an hour with no good reason. None of them know each other. None of them know the sky above them has a name for this moment. The last time a configuration this precise activated in Pisces within a retrograde cycle occurred within your lifetime, in 1988. In rooms that were never photographed, 2 superpowers maintained months of closed-door restraint while the INF Treaty moved toward ratification. The Senate voted 93-5 on May 27th, but the silence that made that vote possible had begun long before any public statement. Think back. What were you holding in 1988 that you have never fully released? There is a question worth asking before the words leave. Why Pisces makes language more dangerous than silence? For that, we need to go a little deeper. The entire retrograde cycle sits inside Pisces. Mercury stationed backward on February 26th at 22 degrees 33 minutes, and it will not leave the sign until after it turns direct on March 20th. Nearly 4 weeks of mental energy turning inside the same zodiacal space, accumulating, circling, finding no clean exit. Most Mercury retrogrades cross sign boundaries. This one doesn't. It stays inside and builds pressure the way a sealed room builds heat. Mars has been in Pisces since early January. This is not the Mars of Scorpio, focused, surgical, capable of drawing clean lines, and not the Mars of Aries, which simply charges forward. In Pisces, Mars pushes without a fixed vector. The energy moves, but it spreads rather than strikes. Two planets that amplify urgency, sitting inside the one sign that dissolves contour. The Babylonian astronomical compendium, Apin, clay tablets compiled around 1000 BCE and later copied through the 7th century, tracked Mercury as Nabu, the divine scribe, with documented precision across the sky. In certain seasonal windows, the tablets record a phase when Nabu's transmissions became unreliable, when the planet entered what the tradition called a period of concealment. Babylonian scribes maintained a silence protocol during these intervals, not because words were forbidden, because the conditions for accurate transmission were not met. They did not have the word retrograde. They had the practice. In Egypt, the priestly tradition around Thoth, god of writing, equated with Mercury by the Greeks, held that certain words spoken aloud during specific lunar phases left the body of the speaker and no longer belonged to them. Research published by Matthew Lieberman at UCLA identified this as a measurable neurological effect. Verbalization of strong internal states reduces their motivational charge. The act of naming partially discharges what it names. You speak the intention. Part of it is spent before it reaches anyone. In Pisces, that effect is amplified. The sign holds no firm boundary between inner and outer space. A word released here doesn't travel with its original shape. It enters the field of another person, with their history, their projections, their defenses, and returns to you changed. Not because they misread it, because Pisces dissolves form. That is its nature, and it has been documented since before Mercury had its Latin name. In 1988, Soviet and American negotiators worked for months in closed rooms, Geneva first, then Washington, moving the INF Treaty through Senate ratification. The withdrawal of Soviet forces from Afghanistan began May 15th. The decision had been announced 3 months earlier, in February, without ceremony. The consequential work happened in contained silence. Public statements came only after the structure was already set. In people past 50, cortisol levels fall faster in the evening than in younger adults. As tension drops, the brain reads the sensation as clarity and interprets it as permission. The impulse to speak is strongest not at dawn, but after dark. Right now, someone has already sent the message. Not a failure, just the pressure finding its way out through the nearest opening, the way it always does. Write what you want to say, not to send, to hold. The neural pathways activated by writing register the intention, just as speaking does. It anchors, but the content stays inside, still yours, still intact, still carrying its original form. Less than 15 hours remain before 1:07 a.m. Eastern. This is the only window in this entire cycle where Mercury moves backward into its collision with Mars in Pisces. It will not come again, 3 times. That is how many times Mercury and Mars have occupied the same celestial degree in the current cycle. November 12th, 2025, January 17th, 2026, March 15th, 2026, at 1:07 a.m. Eastern Time at 10 degrees and 2 minutes of Pisces, 3 points, 3 clock strikes. In November, Mercury was in direct motion. Sagittarius, words traveled forward and built. In January, Mercury was direct again. Words moved, decisions landed, things were set in motion. You may remember what was beginning then, or ending. Something shifted. In March, Mercury moves backward. The same 2 planets, the same type of meeting, entirely different mechanics. Medieval astrological tradition, drawing on earlier Babylonian observational practice, held that a planet passing through the same degree 3 times completes what a single pass only opens. The first crossing raises the theme, the second fixes it, the third resolves it. The word for this in the Latin tradition is triplicatio. Whether you accept the framework or not, the orbital structure is real. 3 measurable passes through the same arc of sky at intervals of roughly 2 months each. You've been inside this cycle since autumn. The third pass is the only one where Mercury moves backward. In people past 50, the prefrontal cortex continues processing unresolved narratives during slow-wave sleep, the deep phase where long-term memory consolidates. Incomplete situations don't wait until morning. They run in background cycles through the night, searching for structural closure. Not truth, not resolution, just an ending the brain can file. If the words were spoken too early and produced no clean result, that loop stays open. It adds to a queue. In the years past 50, that queue is already long. This is not insomnia from anxiety. It's the brain doing what it does with unfinished sequences. Every premature word that found no landing adds another item. Right now, March 14th, the exact conjunction is less than 15 hours away. After 1:07 a.m. Eastern on March 15th, the pressure begins its release. The orb closes. The field starts to discharge. You don't have to do anything for this to happen. The 2 objects will pass through the same degree and separate, whether or not you speak, whether or not you explain, whether or not you send anything at all. Here is what follows directly after. March 17th. Mercury retrograde reaches exact conjunction with the North Node in Pisces. The North Node is not a planet, it's a point, the axis along which eclipses occur, the line that marks where the moon's path crosses the sun's. In classical tradition, it describes the direction of forward motion. Mercury moving backward over this point means the intention is on the line of destination, but still interior, still inside, still forming. March 18th. New moon in Pisces at 28 degrees and 49 minutes. A new lunar cycle opens. March 20th. Mercury stations direct at 8 degrees 29 minutes Pisces at approximately 3:33 p.m. Eastern. Within hours of the spring equinox, the moment the sun crosses the celestial equator and the year shifts axis, language resumes forward motion on the same day the calendar resets. 4 events in 5 days, each one closes behind the previous. The question Mercury carries into its direct station is not complicated. It will move forward carrying whatever was formed in these days. Structure, if it was held. Fragments, if it was scattered. Neither outcome is punished or rewarded. Mercury doesn't evaluate, it just continues. In the late 1980s, Reagan and Gorbachev sat in separate capitals for months, saying nothing publicly about the details being negotiated in closed rooms. The structure that emerged from that silence held for decades. What is built in restraint has a different kind of weight than what is announced while still forming. In the next part, what specifically happens to an intention when it speaks before the field has discharged. Not a warning. A description of the mechanism. Here is what happens when the word leaves too early. Not the version you've heard. Not Mercury retrograde causes miscommunication. That's real, but it's not the center of this. The center is something more specific, and it happens before anyone receives what you've sent. Mercury in Pisces. Retrograde sits in the part of the zodiacal structure that classical tradition calls the 12th space, the threshold between what is still forming and what is ready to appear. Planets here are not weak, they are interior, they are working. Mercury moving backward through this zone is a thought returning to the anteroom. Mars at the entrance pushing forward, Pisces holding no firm boundary between inside and outside. The combination produces a very specific outcome. What exits does not carry its original form. It arrives reshaped by the passage. Matthew Lieberman's research at UCLA documented this as a neurological event. When you verbalize a strong internal state, the prefrontal cortex registers the act of naming as partial completion. The brain records speaking as doing. A portion of the motivational charge is spent in the utterance. You don't feel this happening. You feel only the temporary relief, which the mind reads as confirmation that speaking was correct. James Pennebaker at the University of Texas measured the inverse. Unexpressed material that is written privately, held but not transmitted, retains its full organizational force. The intention stays loaded. You know how the other version ends. You wrote something, or said one sentence at work, or made the call. It felt like clarity in the moment of sending. And then, silence from the other side. Or an answer that traveled in the wrong direction. Or the next morning you were awake at 4 a.m., not because the situation was unresolved, but because you were now constructing the second explanation. The one that explains the first. You were no longer defending the decision. You were defending the words you used to defend it. That is not a failure of character. That is the mechanism. Right now, as this continues, someone has already sent the message. An hour ago. Yesterday evening, when cortisol was low and the sensation of calm felt indistinguishable from certainty. They don't know yet what it cost. They'll know in the morning or in 3 days, or when the response arrives carrying something they didn't put into the original. Pisces returns words with its own material already added. The other person isn't doing this deliberately. The field does it. Approximately 13 hours remain before 1:07 a.m. Eastern. At that moment, Mercury and Mars occupy 10 degrees 2 minutes, Pisces simultaneously, exact, measurable, and brief. After that point, the pressure begins its natural discharge. The field starts to thin, not because anything was resolved, but because the two objects will have passed through the same degree and begun to separate. The tension that has been building since late February starts to move again. You don't have to do anything to reach that point. You only have to refrain from one thing. Between now and 1:07 a.m. Eastern, hold silence in relationships, hold silence at work. Not because it's the right thing, because it's the only window in this cycle where speaking costs more than the words are worth. After 1:07 a.m., check whether the word still feels necessary, not as a rule, as a test. Some things that felt urgent at noon on March 14th will have no charge at all by March 15th at dawn. Others will still be there, cleaner, with their original shape intact. What is held in silence does not disappear. That is the part no one explains. What actually happens to an intention that survives the pressure without being spent? It doesn't stay the same. It changes state. An intention that survives pressure without being spent does not accumulate the way tension does. It changes state. In physics, supercritical condensation describes the process by which a substance under sustained pressure and precise temperature acquires properties of two states simultaneously: the fluidity of liquid and the structural coherence of solid. It doesn't simply compress, it transforms. The pressure was not the problem. The pressure was the condition. What you are holding right now is in that process. 4 days remain from the conjunction to the new moon. 4 specific points along a single arc. March 15th at 1:07 a.m. Eastern, the pressure peaks and begins to discharge. March 17th, Mercury retrograde reaches exact conjunction with the North Node in Pisces. The North Node is the axis along which the moon's path crosses the sun's, in traditional practice, the line of forward direction. Mercury, still moving backward, still interior, lands exactly on this line. The intention has not been spoken. It touches the axis of destination in its unspoken form. That is not a delay. That is direct contact. March 18th, new moon in Pisces at 28 degrees and 49 minutes. The new lunar cycle opens at the final degree of the final sign. In classical tradition, the 29th degree is the degree of completion, the point where a sign finishes its work and transfers its quality forward. This is the last new moon in Pisces until 2027. What enters this cycle does not get a second version this solar year. March 20th, Mercury stations direct at 8 degrees 29 minutes Pisces. Language moves forward again, carrying what was formed in the days before. You know the difference between two kinds of silence in your body. One sits compressed in the chest, held breath, tight jaw, the feeling of restraint that costs something with every hour. The other sits level in the stomach, still, not because nothing is there, but because what is there no longer needs to announce itself. These 4 days are the practice of the second kind, not suppression, precision. A woman didn't respond to the message that arrived on the evening of March 13th. By the morning of March 15th, the situation had shifted and the response was no longer needed. She will not remember this as a significant event. It will simply be a day when nothing happened, and something was preserved without her having to defend it. A man didn't make the call on the night of March 14th. The conversation that would have happened that night never needed to happen. He went to sleep not knowing he had kept something intact. These moments don't become stories. They happen quietly, without record, in rooms no one documents. There is something you have been holding since March 13th, since the move was made. You have not explained it. You have not sent the message, and something in the body already knows. This silence is not incompleteness. It has a different texture than incompleteness. It holds its shape. Before the new moon opens on March 18th, take what you have written and destroy it. Not because it was untrue, because Pisces takes the form of a word and returns the intention beneath it. What you wanted to say will not disappear with the paper. Only the container dissolves. The intention stays in the body without the weight of another person's interpretation, without the distortion that Pisces adds to anything that crosses into external space too early. What enters the new moon in that form, clean, unspoken, already on the North Node line, is what this cycle inherits. What enters a new lunar cycle is not chosen randomly. It is determined by what was preserved or spent in the days before the moon went dark. From March 13th to March 20th, 5 distinct astronomical events form a single unbroken arc. Mars conjunct the North Node on March 13th, the action already taken, the move already on the line of direction. Mercury retrograde conjunct Mars on March 15th at 1:07 a.m. Eastern. The pressure point, the peak, the moment when two objects share 1 degree and then begin to separate. Mercury retrograde conjunct the North Node on March 17th, the unspoken intention touching the line of destination one more time, still interior, still intact. New moon in Pisces on March 18th at 28 degrees and 49 minutes, the cycle opening at the final threshold of the final sign. Mercury direct on March 20th, hours after the equinox, at 8 degrees 29 minutes, Pisces, language moving forward again into a world the sun has just repositioned. 8 days, 5 locks closing in sequence. The 28th and 29th degrees of Pisces carry a specific designation in classical tradition, the anaretic degree, the degree of completion, where a sign finishes its full work and transfers its accumulated quality into what follows. A new moon here is not simply a new beginning, it is the last inheritance point of an entire annual cycle. The next new moon in Pisces falls in 2027. What is seeded on March 18th carries forward without revision for a full solar year. Mercury stations direct on the same day the sun crosses the celestial equator. This is not a metaphor. These are 2 separate astronomical events that happen to fall within hours of each other on March 20th, the language axis and the solar axis both shifting direction simultaneously. Mercury will carry forward into that moment whatever was formed in the preceding 5 days. Structure moves forward as structure. Fragments move forward as fragments. There are things you will never say aloud, not from fear, because they have already crossed into a form that language doesn't reach. They live in the way you hold stillness at 4 a.m. In the decision made on March 13th that you haven't explained to anyone. In the specific weight of knowing without needing the other person to confirm it. Millions of people will pass through these 8 days without knowing their name. Some will hold silence and not understand why it felt correct. Some will speak and not understand why it didn't land. The sky doesn't explain. It continues its motion regardless of what was said or kept. You are one of the ones who knows the name. 3 things remain. Write what you want to say. Keep it, don't send it. Hold silence in relationships and work until 1:07 a.m. Eastern on March 15th. Before the new moon on March 18th, destroy the writing. Not because it was false, because Pisces takes form and returns intention. The intention stays, the container releases. What enters the new cycle is what was in the body, not what was on the page. Mercury reaches Mars at 1:07 a.m. on March 15th, exact at 10 degrees Pisces. The pressure peaks and holds. The words are still loaded, still looking for a way out. What remains is a specific kind of restraint, not comfort, restraint. The quiet effort of keeping something intact by not touching it with language. In 4 days, a new moon opens in Pisces at 28 degrees. What you've held in silence between now and then doesn't disappear, it condenses. That is what the news cycle inherits. Turn on notifications. What comes next in this sequence is not separate from what you chose to keep quiet tonight.